Yeah, I'm up at Conway, now I'm down in Manchester, next to Adam Sandler, but I'll be Woods forever. I'm the new Salinger, cause I could live anywhere, but I choose to live here, the middle of nowhere. I used to shop in Salem, next to Rockingham Park, right there up on 28, you'll find Canopy Lake Park. Bring me up to Portsmouth, the saloon at State Street, catch me up at Gillies after hours for some late eat. It's not the Kangamangus, it's the Kankamogus, it's a scenic byway that I like to drive in August. Now I'm down at Bedford, home of Seth Meyers here, also Sarah Silverman, we're funny motherfuckers here. We like to say what's up, guy, it's our way to say hi. In February it is good to know a plow guy. It is shaped like a key, also where I like to ski. Tell by my belt buckle that I'm most definitely
New
from
Hampshire. And where there's no income or sales tax, there's nothing much to do. Here in New Hampshire. These streets where leaf peepers drive to, maple syrup is so due.
Come on.
This is New Hampshire, Hampshire.
I made you hot. Catch me up at Loudon at the Speedway for the race, yo. I made the flannel shirt more famous than a scarecrow. Don't drink and drive here, listen to what I say. Even though we put our liquor stores right on the highway. You can drive Mount Washington, I got my Monadnock in 1787. We invented the alarm clock. Concord Coach, Dartmouth Coach, the Downies to Amtrak. On Squam Lake, Henry Fonda tell you how to act. Derry's Alan Shepard, first guy in a spaceship. It's a pity that Krista McAuliffe didn't make it. Did you hear about the ice storm of 08? I went without power for 11 straight days. You can buy a handgun, you can buy some fireworks. Sandwich Fair, rest in peace, Daniel Webster. America's Stonehenge, long live the dairy trade, long live the old man. I'm from the Granite State.
New Hampshire, place where Stonyfield yogurt is made in, and cow tipping so cool. Here in New Hampshire,
Welcome to the woods, baby.
DSL service is brand new. You might even see a moose. Here in New Hampshire, Hampshire, Hampshire.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Gives his smartest bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. That's from Robert Frost, he's our most famous poet. It was actually written up in Vermont, but it's associated with the 603, where it's a fact I don't know any Hispanics and just one black guy. You can go to Bike Week, that's up in Laconia. In the winter months at the Notch at Franconia. Home of BODE, our Olympic ski champion. He faced high pressure like my man Alfred
New
Brilliant.
Hampshire, if you don't want to wear a helmet, there's nothing they can do. Here in New Hampshire, Marquis first Browns on the seafood. Tell me which one will you choose when you're in New Hampshire, Hampshire, Hampshire. 9 state ratified out of all 50. It can get cool, but still the auto's very pretty. When this song makes me rich, I'ma move to right. Everybody pump your fist and yell, live free or die.
Live free or
or
die.
die. In New Hampshire, stay where Triple H the wrestler hails from. That guy would destroy you if you knock New Hampshire. Yeah, it's just like old Hampshire, but new. We're out of jokes to do. About New Hampshire, Hampshire, Hampshire.
Oh my goodness. I love that song.
It's so awesome. It's the best.
Oh, we are here at Liberty Forum here in New Hampshire, Hampshire. So it's just like Dave, it's just like old Hampshire but new.
It is. It's new. And DSL service. True story. We now have DSL. So anybody looking to come here and worried about the internet connectivity, we do have DSL.
Yes, folks. It's going to be like this for the next 3 days. You've got myself, Vin Armani, and Mr. David Butler, and an assortment of the most wonderful libertarians in the world here at Liberty Forum 2019 in lovely Manchester, New Hampshire. It's gonna be great. You've put together a schedule here that. How many people would you say we are going to be sitting down and talking to that are scheduled?
Oh God, there's got to be 20. I mean, it's just a ton of people.
20. It looks like 50 to me. Dude. So what we've got is 3 wonderful days of libertarian fun, speakers, a lot of people just gathering. You can probably hear it starting to pack up. We are here in downtown Manchester, and I figured that we should just jump right into this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're joined by somebody that I have come to enjoy interacting with. Stefan Kinsella is here. I think to start this whole thing off, I think that you are a good... Stefan, I've been thinking about, what are we going to talk about? This is the first time they've ever done a live broadcast. I think one of the things that's unique about New Hampshire, for those of us like myself who are, let's say, a little more on the no government side as opposed to the small government side, I think that there's this wonderful balance that you find here in New Hampshire between those two. I know you're an interesting character, I think, to have this conversation with, because I think academically have a lot of background that is about why government should not be there, and yet you have found a great balance in being able to educate people about what the things that we need to pay attention to. Let's get into a little bit of your background. Do you consider yourself an anarcho-capitalist?
100% yes.
100% yes. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is what I'm getting at. This is the place that I want to start. Let's talk about what is anarcho-capitalism, because we're here in New Hampshire, we're at these events. It's one of the few places where you will actually maybe run into more than one anarcho-capitalist in the same place. Let's talk about what this means, how this has informed you, and then we can get into, I think, how those of us who are here fit into this whole picture to start this out.
Well, you said government, and of course, technically, we anarchists are against the state, right? I mean,
let's get into that. What's the difference? We talk about the state as versus the government. What does this mean?
So the way I think about it, and Albert J. Nock actually wrote on this too, about the distinction between government and the state. When we drove in today from the airport, my friend and I, with a nice driver, Jaffet, we crossed the state line, right? And no one said we crossed the government line. It's just so the words are used differently, right? When Donald Trump recently had the partial government shutdown, no one said there was a state shutdown.
Ooh, interesting.
When in England, when there's a parliamentary election and they have to so-called form a new government, and sometimes there's not a government for a while, the word government has a distinctive meaning from the state. So the state is the corporate entity that we libertarians oppose. I think what the state has done is the state has co-opted private institutions and functions that could and would exist privately, and then they've made people think that they have to be done by the state.
We're talking about the roads.
The roads, but also the government itself. So government really means the governing institutions, law, order, defense. Now, we anarcho-capitalists think that can be done privately. So really, we're not against government per se. We're just so used to identifying the government that the state runs with the state itself, so that, and the state, of course, pushes that too, right? So, and of course, even minarchists and statists push that idea, so that if you say you're against the state, then they will say that you've admitted that you're for chaos, you're against order, because you've admitted now you're against the government, because they use those words the same. So it's sort of like a trick they use with the language. So yeah, I always say I'm against government, I'm against government schools. You can't say state school. It gets confusing after a while, but at certain points you do need to clarify that we're not against law and order and rules and regulations. We're just against the monopolized and sort of coercive, violent imposition of them on us by the state itself.
So I think an excellent example of this is like the Food and Drug Administration, right? So we have the USDA, we have the FDA, and the thought is, well, if we don't have these entities, government entities, then we will not have safe food and water, and our meat is going to be contaminated. But then you look in the private sector and you see like Underwriters Laboratories, right? So we actually do have a private solution that certifies electrical products.
Yes.
That there's no government entity that does that, but we have a private entity that does that. Why could there not be a private organization that serve the same purpose as the FDA or the USDA or whatever?
Yeah, and I think one distinction some libertarians have tried to make in the past, like Murray Rothbard and even Ayn Rand to some extent, is distinguishing between the functions that ought to be done and the ones that ought not to be done. So fire departments, even government or police department, preventing regular crimes, those are things that ought to be done. It's just the government does them or the state does them poorly or inefficiently.
Sure.
But there are some things the state does that we don't want there to be done at all. Like like if you say, who would put people in jail for smoking marijuana in a private society? The answer is no one. Who would put you in jail if you don't pay your taxes? No one. So there are some functions that you want the government to do inefficiently. And the other things that the government is doing that it shouldn't be doing, that private people should be doing, then the question for libertarians is, do you want them to do that more efficiently so that we're harmed less by the fact that they've monopolized it? Or do you want them to do it poorly so that it finally collapses and we can finally take over, in our revolution? So that's a strategical or tactical question, I think.
So one of the things that I have always loved about participating in Free State Project events is that we are able to have these conversations and there are ideas for actual solutions. Now, from a moral standpoint, I don't think that it's necessary to have all of the solutions or all of the alternatives presented to be able to say, well, using violent coercion to get somebody to do what you want them to do is immoral. I think that that's immoral to start. But I think that it is interesting, when we start to talk about, well, what are some of the ways that this could be done? I know that you have a strong background as a Misesian, being around individuals. For those people who are maybe tuning in and have not been to New Hampshire, have maybe not spent a lot of time around libertarians, or trying to think, how does this thing all go down? Can we just delve into a little bit, because I know that this is right in your wheelhouse. Start delving into some of the places. Maybe if we're talking about criminal justice, that's something people are worried about. Infrastructure, that's something people always say, well, how would we do this without the government? Talk a little bit about how these things could happen.
Well, a lot of these issues or cases where they were previously done privately to one degree or the other, and then the government or the state slowly co-opted these things. Hans Hermann Hoppe has a great article from about 25 years ago, Banking in Nation States, and he explains how the government insidiously gets its way into one thing after the other. The roads, communication, education, and money. And when it gradually takes all these institutions over, it gets people thinking that that's the natural way of things. And if you want to know what would it be like in freedom, you just have to undo that or unravel it. Now, so many things have come about in the meantime, it's not always easy to predict. One thing I like to be careful about, and by the way, there's a ton of libertarian scholarship and literature and thought experiments and books that explain what would be done in the absence of government, right? Private fire departments, things like that. But I think we do have to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of admitting the case that there has to be a guarantee that it's going to be done. So, like, if you have some, standard mainstream liberal in America, and we say things like, well, you don't need welfare or public schools or government insured health care, because in the free market that would be taken care of. They say, how? And we say, well, people would pay for it themselves. What about the poor? They'll say.
Right.
And then we always say, well, there'd be charity. But what these people want is a guarantee, right? And if you can't give them a guarantee, and we can't give them a guarantee.
But can the government give them a guarantee?
Well, that's the point. And so I always say, well, look, Medicare and Social Security, they're going to collapse at a certain point because they're not stable. Some governments fall. So you can't guarantee that anyway for the long run.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's really important, is that there seems to be it's not that there seems to be, there is definitely a mass hypnosis. I mean, you might say a mind control even toward the government, which in no part due to government schools. I don't know how, someone's going to educate you that they're a bad choice or a bad idea. I want to talk about, one of the things that I think is one of the big hypnoses. And it's actually how the first time you and I got a chance to interact was I moderated a debate that I was remote. I was in Las Vegas, but you and Craig Wright were in London. It was a debate about intellectual property, which is your specialty. Talk a little, which is kind of, some might think is ironic for an anarcho-capitalist to be a professional in the world of intellectual property. Talk to us a little bit about that sort of mass hypnosis, about things, about the government being able to license ideas, about how you became involved and interested in the idea of intellectual property.
Well, okay, as for anarcho-capitalists and other libertarians, I've been involved in this since the mid-'80s. And I've come across many libertarians who have very strange ideas, not just about what you mentioned, but me being an IP lawyer or a patent lawyer, and also being a libertarian who opposes it, but just the idea of having any job at all and paying taxes to buy cruise missiles, or being a lawyer and having to swear allegiance to the state bar. I've had these kind of libertarian kind of cranks, and I think largely they just want to have an excuse to not be paying income taxes because they don't have a job, or it's an excuse to go off the grid. Mm-hmm. Look, if you want to go off the grid, go off the grid. If I were out there advocating for the law that I say is one of the worst laws that we've ever had, and I can go into that in a second, or if I were actually prosecuting it in the sense of helping attack innocent victims, there would be a case for hypocrisy. But even that is not an argument against what I'm proposing. It just means I'm a hypocrite and I'm trapped in the system. But as a matter of fact, the problem is the system is so complex and arcane, people don't understand what I do. I mean, most people, even that are married, they don't understand what everyone does. Everyone has such specialized jobs now. Most people I know don't really know what I do as a patent attorney. But I'm able to pick and choose, and I have picked and chosen, where I do a certain thing, but I don't do other things. And I never have done the other things, which I regard as immoral. Would I forgive someone who did it? Yeah, I can understand. The system encourages people to do things like this, right? But look, let's assume that the patent system and the copyright system we have is very problematic and very damaging to society, which I think it is. Who would you expect to know that other than someone who's skeptical of the state and knows economics and actually knows what the law is like, which is me. So I don't think it's surprising that I know that. In the end, I view myself more like an oncologist, like a doctor who has a career fighting cancer. He wants there to be a world where there's no cancer. If he achieved that someday, he wouldn't have a job anymore, right? So he's trying to put himself out of business, and I'm doing the same thing. In the meantime, I defend companies from the system that exists because that need is there given that the system exists. So it's a difficult, tricky thing because sometimes you have clients that want you to turn aggressive, and I don't want to do that in my career as a libertarian. But I don't think everyone else has the luxury that I have as being a lawyer. So I've been able to pick and choose and to steer it a certain way, and I've been happy with that. And it's helped to educate me on the right way to make the case against what I think is one of the worst and most insidious laws out there.
Why is most people wouldn't? I believe you know that I believe that that we are in lockstep on that. You're right. Most people they have no clue. Most people would say intellectual property.
I think most libertarians would, if you had them in a room for 5 hours.
Right. Exactly.
I could persuade them that it's unlibertarian.
In 5 minutes, can you persuade our audience that there's a problem with intellectual property on this?
I'll try. It'll be a little bit esoteric, but
let's do it.
But the point, if I persuade someone that it's wrong, they still don't think it's one of the top 20 problems in society. Okay. I think it's the top 1 or 2 or 3, to be honest.
Explain why.
The basic reason is that we humans, there are 2 things we have to do in life and that we need in life to survive, and that is to use the scarce resources in the world. We live on a scarce planet. But we also use our knowledge and our ideas. So basically those two things are essential and crucial to human flourishing and prosperity. The knowledge of how the world works, and then command of these resources. Now, the resources are things that we can fight over and clash over. So it's good that you and I can cooperate in society. We benefit from the division of labor and from living among other people. But there's also the danger of violent force among us. So we have property rules that emerge that define who owns which things. But this is just one half of human action. The other half is knowledge. And if you notice over time, human society grows by the accumulation of knowledge. The more we learn from one generation to the next, the more recipes and ideas we have, and everyone's free to use that to guide their actions, and there's no scarcity of that. In other words, you and I can't use your car at the same time, but we can both use the same design for a car at the same time. I can make an identical car to yours, or I can grow corn in my fields using the same technique as you, and when one idea prospers, it spreads across the world more quicker now, right, because of the internet. But even in the old days, it would spread eventually. Whatever successful techniques worked would spread. People would learn. Humanity grew. So the reason we're wealthy is because of the combination of knowledge and scarce resources. Property rights are essential for one, but they're devastating towards the other. If you try to impose property rights on ideas, you actually stifle their spread, and you penalize people from using them. So you slow down the accumulation of that knowledge part of human action and success. So I actually believe that the human race is far poorer now because of the cumulative effect of the stifling of innovation and human and artistic freedom because of copyright and patent laws than we would have been. We would be far wealthier and richer. Patent laws and even copyright laws literally kill people. Patent laws kill people because it reduces the supply of certain life-saving drugs.
Sure, absolutely.
Like in the what was the case?
Shkreli, right?
So Martin Shkreli is a bad example because that was actually out of patent.
Interesting.
He used the FDA process, which is sort of like an extension on the patent system. So the FDA system imposes a secondary monopoly, which is similar to patents. Okay. And in fact, the FDA system is often one excuse used to have a patent system, because people say, well, how can I recoup my costs after going through this lengthy and expensive FDA process?
Right, they force you into it.
So the government imposes FDA regulations. It increases costs, reduces supply, slows down progress, and it also forces companies during the trial phase to reveal their secrets to all their competitors. So at 2 or 3 or 4 years later, when the FDA finally approves it, all their competitors have already reverse engineered the public information that they were forced to reveal. They're ready to compete right away. In a free market, you wouldn't necessarily have to reveal.
You could have trade secrets.
You could have more trade secrets. And in fact, one of the excuses for patent law is that trade secrets aren't as efficient. We want to encourage people to reveal their knowledge to the world. So we're going to give them a monopoly for 17 years to make them. That's what the patent bar.
It's very silly. That's a very silly argument.
Well, every argument for IP is ridiculous, and the problem is, you have patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and then arcane things like trade dress, moral rights, rights of attribution, boat hole designs. Bizarre things like this, and no one understands this except for a few weird patent lawyers like me. So everyone gets it confused. Even the people making the arguments for IP, they'll switch from trademark to copyright in the same sentence, even though their argument doesn't make any sense. Apply from one to the other, and then if you say, "Listen, that's not the way the law works," they'll say, "Well, I'm not an expert." I'm like, "That's fine," but you seem to have a vociferous opinion on this horrible, evil system. I really fundamentally believe that the world would be, and it's not just IP. I think it's this idea of copying and of information. I mean, you have Trump renegotiating these trade deals, and we can argue about free trade and things like that. But part of his argument is that China is stealing our intellectual property. And everyone agrees, everyone's agreeing with that. Even the Democrats are clapping when he says that. What does that even mean? They're not stealing anything.
Right.
They're not even specific. Do they mean trade theft, trade secret theft? Do they mean violating patents that they don't have? Do they mean that they have a weak patent enforcement system in their courts? They're never clear about exactly what they mean.
So, I do appreciate your clarity. You're going to be speaking twice here this weekend. correct? You've got
Yes.
something today.
Later
this
today,
evening?
we're having a roundtable sort of debate about immigration policy.
So that is definitely something for the people who are checking out the stream, who also happen to be here. Stefan is really dynamic in the debate format, so I would advise everybody to check that out. And then tomorrow,
Tomorrow I'm talking about property rights in general, which feeds into what we're talking about here. It sounds boring, and maybe it is boring to some people, but to me, this opens up a whole new vista. It's sort of like when we talked about government versus the state and getting your terms clarified. I'm going to talk about the concept of property and how it links into what liberty and freedom are, and why do we libertarians care about property so much? And conversely, why do our enemies accuse us of thinking property has rights and things like that, which we don't really believe, but you can see why they're a little bit right on the money in saying, I thought you guys were for liberty. Now you say you're in favor of rights for property. Which one are you for? So I want to clarify the relationship between property rights and liberty.
Excellent. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, I get to pop in a little bit on both of those. We've got some breaks in between. I may just leave out and leave Dave here to just say something, with the smooth voice. Thank you, Stefan, for stopping in. We will see you throughout. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So, David.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about who we're going to have in addition.
We have so many guests coming up.
Thanks, Stefan.
Unbelievable. So later on today, we're actually going to be talking to Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht, and such a tragic story. And, so I think we'll obviously talk about, Ross's case and what's been going on with Ross, but also the activist work that she has